Record. All right. So just for the benefit of those who are joining us via the recording, who missed the first point, we just introduced the very first concept, which is necessary for understanding how to make an item kosher or how to make a pot kosher, which is kabolo kachpoto. The means by which something is absorbed is the mechanism by which it will be expunged. The way we use an item affects the means by which it's going to be koshered. And again, that means that if you have an item that only came in contact with non-kosher items that are cold, if you have a bowl that was only used for salad, you don't necessarily have to put that bowl into boiling hot water. Rather, you would only have to wash it out. But as I mentioned, it's sometimes a little bit more complicated than that. You know, when we wash something, when we put it in a dishwasher, very often the bowl is exposed to very hot water, which can then make whatever was not kosher in it become something that requires heat to expunge it. But as a general rule of thumb, the way in which an item was used will affect the way we kosher that item. So that's the very first concept that we have to know for understanding making, koshering in general, and specifically koshering a Pesach, koshering one's kitchen for Pesach. Okay, the next concept you see on the sheet in front of you is libun gamur, which is greater incineration. An item in which, or a utensil in which an item has been cooked, baked, dried, such as a cookie sheet, requires burning until the metal glows red hot, usually in excess of 800 degrees Fahrenheit. An oven in its self-cleaning cycle reaches temperatures great enough to be considered libun gamur. So this means to say that if I have a food item that is being baked on some utensil, and the food item is in direct contact with that utensil, the way in which we're able to expunge whatever was absorbed into the utensil is through raising the temperature to the point where the metal turns red hot. This is again needed when you have dry items like a slab of meat that's grilling on a barbecue, or you have a cake that's baking in a pan, or if you have bread baking in a pan, that pan, in order for it to be expunged, in order for whatever the chametzkeit, whatever has been absorbed into it that we want to remove, in order for that to happen, that piece of metal has to be heated until the point where it would glow if it was red hot, which is a very difficult thing to do. Again, running an oven through a self-cleaning cycle is just such a solution. That's the greater incineration, or libun gamur. Then you have libun kal, lesser incineration. An object baked with, yet does not come in direct contact with the food, requires a thorough cleaning, followed by at least 24 hours of idle use. I'll talk about that more in a moment. The item must then be run in an oven at its highest temperature, usually about between 500 and 600 degrees Fahrenheit, for at least 40 minutes to an hour. These items, because they do not come in direct contact with food, have a lesser requirement in order to make them kosher for Pesach, or just to kosher them in general. So something like an oven rack, which does not usually come in direct contact with food, would have to go through such a procedure in order to make it kosher for Pesach. Libun kal, here I've indicated that it has to be sitting idly for 24 hours. That's not a hard and fast rule when it comes to libun more generally. The greater and lesser incineration under general circumstances do not necessarily require having to have sat idle for 24 hours before you can affect these kinds of koshering methods. But this has become the standard practice that libun gamur does not require 24 hours of idle use, versus libun kal, which is just running an oven at its highest temperature for about 40 minutes to an hour. That, according to many halakhic authorities, does require 24 hours. I generally don't tell people that that's the case, but I wrote it down over here because if you do encounter another rabbi, you will know that just because I said you don't need to, that rabbi is not being excessively stringent. I'm just sharing different points of view. I don't necessarily say this is the case, but that is a perfectly valid and perhaps even a widespread practice as well. All right, now we get to what perhaps we're most familiar with, which is boiling, hagala. Pots and pans in which food with liquids are cooked must be thoroughly cleaned and allowed to sit for 24 hours. Here, it is an absolute hard and fast requirement. Water should then be heated to a rolling boil Items being cautioned in this matter may not touch one another, may not touch each other. And if using tongs, utensils will have to be immersed a second time while holding from a different position. If kashering a pot, a heated stone must be added in order to ensure that the water boils over the lips. Kashered items should then be rinsed off with cold water. So what's going on over here? What are we speaking about? Well, this is what we're most familiar with, pots. This is about like forks and knives and other things like that. Items that are generally not heated up in an oven. They're usually on a stovetop, but they can be in an oven, like a pan that's used for, for roasting something. I mean, not roasting, but boiling something in an oven. All of these items, all of these utensils acquire either their non-kosher quality or their chametz quality through a liquid medium. Since they acquire their status through a liquid medium, that means that they have to be expunged through a liquid medium. Again, getting back to that very first idea we spoke to, that the way something is absorbed is the way that it'll be expunged. Things that require roasting, which are items in direct contact with the utensils through heat, the only way to kasher that utensil is through heat. Here, these utensils come in contact or acquire their chametz qualities through a water medium. Therefore, the way they're expunged is going to be through a liquid medium. That means, again, so that if you have a pot that has been used for non-kosher food and now you're koshering your kitchen, or you want to make your pot kosher for Passover, you have to let it sit idle for 24 hours. And here it's a requirement, and we'll talk about why that is shortly. You have to let it sit for 24 hours. You fill it up with water. You let the water reach a roaring boil, and then you have to add something hot that will make the water go over the edges. You don't have to kasher the outside of the pot, but the edges of the pot, the lip of the pot also requires kashering. So taking a heated stone that was put in an oven and you put into the water so that the hot water now, while it's in a roaring boil, runs over the lip of the pot, that's how you ensure that all parts of that pot are kashered. If you're koshering forks and spoons and things of that sort, you can use tongs, it's true, but the specific place where the tongs make contact with that fork or that knife or whatever it is that we're putting into this boiling water, that's actually stopping the water from making contact with that specific location. And as such, you're going to have to sort of shift the tong around at some point. You don't have to do the entire utensil all at once. You can do part and part. All right, that is Hagala. And again, this is for something that comes in contact with sources of heat and a transference through a liquid medium. Now, what happens if something is not necessarily exposed to a source of heat? Let's talk, for example, about a countertop. So if I have my chicken soup that has, I don't know, it has noodles in it, it has lakshan. I'm having a lakshan soup with my chicken soup. That's noodles for the uninitiated in Yiddish. If you have noodles in your soup, well, that soup is now chametz. And now say you put a pot of the soup down on your counter and you're a klutz like I am, and you spill some of the soup over the side. Now you have hot water on a countertop. Well, that countertop also, because there is a heat and a transference of chametzkeit into the countertop, the way I can kasher that is the way in which it was absorbed, which means I don't have to boil the countertop. All I need to do is pour hot water over the countertop. We'll talk about specific examples later on, but again, this is employing the idea, the way in which something was absorbed is the way in which you kasher it. If you roast something, the way you kasher it is through roasting the pan. If you have a soup boiling in a pot, that's you kasher the pot through boiling water in it. If something acquires its chametz quality through water or something else being poured on top of it, the way you kasher it is by pouring something on top of it. And there is another way of koshering something. And this is called miloi ve'iroi. And this is actually something that we utilize on occasion when it comes to things that cannot otherwise be koshered. Let's talk, for example, a question I was asked just the other night. Somebody called me up and said, my parents didn't keep kosher, and they have this beautiful set of glasses that are extremely expensive. They're antiques, they're ornate, they're beautiful, and they have a lot of sentimental value, but they were used for non-kosher items. Can I kosher them? And the answer is actually yes, you can. You can't kosher everything this way, but definitely things that have not been used for quite a while, like in the case of these cases, these glasses had not been used for at least a year. What you do is you fill a tub full of water, you put the glasses into that tub full of water and you let it sit for 24 hours. Then you drain that water and you refill it and you let it sit for another 24 hours. And then you do that a third time for a total of 72 hours submerged in different water that have been changed every 24 hours. It doesn't have to be exactly 24 hours, but every new addition of water has to be 24 hours from that new water that's been added. So you can be sitting there for 30 hours, you still have to do another 24 hours with the new water, and so on and so forth. And this is something that we rely on for items that in general do not come in contact with hot food, but occasionally do. This is something we'll discuss when we start dealing with glassware. We'll talk about all of these things when we start dealing with the specifics. All right, now, why do you have to wait 24 hours before you boil the water? Is really the question. If I have chametz in this pot, or just as generally more of a rule when it comes to kashering things from being non-kosher, but it definitely applies to Pesach as well. In order for the water, for example, it's like this. If I have a pot if I have a pot that I've used for non-kosher food, and then I boil water in that pot, that water is considered to be non-kosher. So how does boiling water kasher a pot? Well, the answer is, if you've let it sit for 24 hours, any bit of flavor, any bit of whatever it is that was absorbed into the pot that we're now trying to expunge, it's considered to have gone stale at that point. It's no longer complementary. So a non-kosher pot can only make water not kosher only if it's been used within the past 24 hours. But once the pot has not been used for 24 hours, then that water is now not considered no longer not kosher. The water is now considered just plain old-fashioned water. And it's for that reason that letting a pot sit for 24 hours is required in order for the pot to be kashered. The idea is that whatever it is that is being absorbed into the pot, it's considered to be something that generates flavor. And when it comes to non-kosher food or milk and meat, it's the flavor that we really we understand to be the prohibition. The prohibition is anything that has that flavor in it. So if you cook something in a pot, and our stainless steel pots are not like the old cast iron pots that they used to use, but if you cook something in a pot, at least in the old pots that were not as fancy and as high grade as ours are, well, then the flavor of that food will be absorbed into the pot. Anything that's cooked afterwards will now acquire some of that flavor. So what we're doing by kashering is we're trying to expunge any flavors that would be present, and we require 24 hours in order to ensure that the water is not considered to have absorbed any of that flavor from the pot. It's now considered to be an uncomplimentary flavor, and therefore it's not part of any Torah prohibition. So that is a necessity in many cases. Hagala requires 24 hours, and many authorities say that even the lesser incineration also requires 24 hours. Now, in general, we say it's always the best thing to do is wait 24 hours. That's not always possible. If you cannot wait 24 hours before you kasher, give me a call and we'll talk about what our fallback options are. But when it comes to making something kosher, this is definitely a hard and fast rule. It's a necessity. When it comes to Pesach, it's a little bit more malleable, and we can talk about that in person, in private. Anyways, items that cannot be completely cleaned, such as bottles, if you can't reach your fingers in there to get all the bits, cannot be kashered to libun kal, and it cannot be kashered through hagala. You can't, for example, take a pot, or let's say I have a metal canister. I have a hip flask I use for booze. I have a hip flask that I keep around. I can't get in there to clean it. That is not something that I can ever kasher, because if there's any food residue or if there's something physical inside there, no matter what I do, if I boil hot water in it, that food is still there, and that food is never done away with. These practices about boiling and lesser incineration only work if the item has been completely cleaned. If there's some actual food stuff present, you can't kasher the item, which we're going to actually perhaps discuss when we deal with some very specific cases. If you have, for example, like a can opener, which is very difficult to get into all the little nooks and crannies and all the gears that are there, it can't be kashered. If you can't clean it, it can't be kashered. But that's only true when it comes to boiling the water or whatever, the iroi, the pouring of the hot water. When it comes to libun gum or greater incineration, all food stuff is considered to have been completely done away with. It's now ash. It's no longer food, and it's not. And therefore, there are certain considerations that we have to weigh. And we're now going to talk about some the specific instances. So let's now, oh, it's very important also. Wood can be kasher, but only if the surface is smooth for the same reason. If the surface is rough, like on a cutting board, you can't get into all the little grooves there. There still might be some residual food. Therefore, it's not recommended that you kasher a wooden cutting board unless you sand it down. But sometimes people have fancy wooden cutting boards. They don't necessarily want to sand it down. In that case, it's better to put your cutting board away for Pesach and use something else. But wood can be kashered through all of these methods. Obviously, you can't incinerate it because it'll burn, but you can put it into boiling water. Earthenware such as pottery, china, enamel, and Teflon, these are items that actually cannot be kashered. They cannot be kashered, and as such, all those sorts of items have to be put to the side. Okay, let us now talk about practical considerations. We've now discussed all the considerations that are sort of make the rubric that we work with in terms of the methodology of determining, can this be kashered, can it not be kashered? Let's now talk about some of the more practical cases. Let's talk about, for example, self-cleaning ovens. Self-cleaning ovens obviously reach greater incineration level, and therefore they don't even necessarily need to be cleaned. You could just sort of put the self-cleaning oven cycle on, and that will clean that will clean the insides of the oven. You have to be careful, however, because the self-cleaning cycle does not actually clean every part of the oven. For example, there's a gasket on the inside. The gasket is very susceptible to any kind of damage. You have to be careful, but you do have to clean that gasket. And you do have to clean the areas around the door that are perhaps not that are not part of the oven itself that gets hot as part of the self-cleaning cycle. There still will be some food residue on the area around the door, and it's also in some cases on some spaces on the door side as well. The door that you open up when you pull it open there'll be some sections that have been cleaned through the self-cleaning cycle, but there'll be some parts that have not. Those parts there should be cleaned as well as you can, preferably using a caustic oven cleaner. Caustic oven cleaners are the best when it comes to making something kosher or making something kosher for Passover, because the caustic aspect of it will completely remove the food quality from the food, and it makes it no longer food. And that's the ultimate desire. We want the stuff to be so completely done away with, so completely ruined that it's no longer food, that it can no longer contaminate our stuff. Now, the racks that, as I mentioned, inside the oven do not necessarily have to go through the self-cleaning cycle. In fact, some ovens do not allow for the racks to be inside the oven when it's being kashered or when it's going through a self-cleaning cycle. So, if at all possible, you should keep your racks in there. That's definitely definitely the preferred practice. But acknowledging that it may not be possible, you run the oven through a self-cleaning cycle, and then you run the racks through the libun kal, which is the lesser incineration, which means you just run it through the oven at its highest temperature for about 40 minutes to an hour. If you run it through a self-cleaning cycle, sometimes the items get a bit discolored. If you take a bit of mineral oil and you rub it on the racks, it usually solves some of the problems. Sometimes the paint on it can come off. So you have to be careful. You have to read your owner's manual carefully. Be judicial about it all. That said, if it's not possible, you then run the racks through the lesser incineration, which is just the oven. Again, after the item has been completely cleaned, you allow the oven to run at its highest temperature for about 40 minutes to an hour. Now, that's true about self-cleaning ovens. Conventional ovens, the best thing to do is to use a caustic cleaner on the inside, clean everything out as best you can. You want to ensure that there's no food residue anywhere. And sometimes you'll find there'll be spots of discoloration. The best thing to do in that case is also, again, to use the caustic on that. And if it doesn't work once or twice, then you can just assume that it's ash. You can ignore it. And then you run the oven through its self-cleaning cycle. Not a self-cleaning cycle, excuse me, we're talking about a conventional oven. You run the oven at its highest temperature for about 40 minutes to an hour, and that is considered to be the best option in that case if you do not have a self-cleaning, if you do not have a self-cleaning function on your oven. Now, there are some other kinds of self-cleaning mechanisms. They don't use the conventional self-cleaning features, something like the Aqualift or the steam clean. those items, the Aqualift and Steam Clean, never actually kosher the oven. They never get hot enough to be considered the greater incineration. So then we would be left with having to clean the oven out as best we can. I know that some of these ovens have special coating on the inside. You can't use caustic. So you have to clean it out as best you can without destroying the oven. And then you would run the oven again at its highest temperature for about 40 minutes to an hour. And that's how you would take care of that. All right. Now, the oven hoods and exhaust fans. Oven hoods and exhaust fans can sometimes have food residue on them. And the best thing to do is really to wipe it off or to clean it off as best as you can. You want to get it as clean as free as you can of any kind of food residue. The reason why you don't want any kind of food residue there is because there's the potential that something might come in contact with it. It might fall off. There's nothing there on the hood or that's in the filter that's really going to do anything that will make your food not kosher for Pesach if it just remains in statio. But on Passover we're extra scrupulous, we're extra careful, and as such, it's definitely recommended to clean out the hood, to wipe it down and remove any food residue that you might find there. But there's no koshering that's required because it's so high off of the stove. It's not considered to be a place where things get hot enough that it would that the hood themselves become not kosher or chametz in any way. And if I can just go take a step back, going back to ovens, if you have a convection oven, a self-cleaning function is great. If you do not have a self-cleaning function in your convection oven, you'll have to clean the fan. Now, what would be required there? Obviously, sometimes you cannot completely disassemble your oven. That's definitely true. So you would try to spray oven cleaner, preferably a caustic, into the recess where the fan can be found, and have the fan be sprayed with the cleaner, and thereby sort of removing all of the food, or at least all the stuff from the fan. And by doing that and then running it again through the lesser incineration, the 1 hour at the highest temperature, that would be adequate as well. All right. Now, broilers and broiler pans. This is a fun one. I have to be honest with you. I've had ovens my entire life, and I have never used a broiler in the oven. I mean, I used the broiler function in the main oven when I was making steak for my family once. Usually barbecue it, but I've never really used a broiler or had a broiler pan that was specific to a broiler, the broiler drawer underneath the oven. The broiler pan cannot be koshered by simply turning it on. Because food is roasted directly on this pan, the pan has to go through libun gummer, has to go through the greater incineration, and generally that can't be done too easily. You can't take those things out and stick it into an oven and have it run through a self-cleaning cycle. So it's better, what I recommend is that when it comes to the broiler, clean it out as best you possibly can. Take out the pan and cleaning out the stuff on the inside. If you want to buy an additional broiler pan for Pesach, that's something you can definitely do. That's definitely a possibility. If that is not a possibility, then you'd have to you would have to sort of just close the drawer, close the broiler for Pesach, and use it after Pesach. And the same thing is true when it comes to any other kind of food, any other pan that comes in direct contact with the food, something like a griddle, and even a frying pan for that matter, because the frying pan comes in direct contact with the food without a liquid medium frequently. Yep, there's often butter, there's often oil, but there'll be times, when you're making pancakes and the oil is all absorbed into the pancake and the pancake is directly in contact. The pan is directly in contact with the food. All of these items would require a self-cleaning cycle. I don't recommend that you take your frying pan and run it through a self-cleaning cycle. It will definitely ruin it. Put your frying pan away for Pesach. If you have a cast iron pan, it will survive, but you'll have to re-season it, which is not necessarily what you want to do. It's probably a better idea just to put your frying pan or your griddle away. Unless you're absolutely devoted to one specific pan, then you run it through a self-cleaning cycle, and that would be adequate. Just something to be aware of. Not everybody considers the self-cleaning cycle to be greater incineration. I know that the practice in Chabad is that they do not view it to be greater incineration. They do not consider it to be a legitimate way of koshering items, and therefore they do not take advantage of the self-cleaning cycle to make things kosher. All right, the same thing is true when it comes to warming drawers. Warming drawers cannot be koshered because the heat settings there never reach a heat that would be adequate to making it kosher. And similar to a broiler pan, you have to sort of put it to the side if you don't want to run a blowtorch on it. And I don't recommend anyone here use blowtorches. It's not fun. It's dangerous, and you stand a chance of ruining all your stuff. All right, now microwave ovens. Microwave ovens is a contentious matter within halacha. I am of the opinion that you can kosher a microwave oven. You have to clean it out really, really, really well. You have to let it sit for 24 hours, not having been used. Then you stick a styrofoam cup or any other kind of a cup. You stick it in the microwave oven. You let the oven run at its highest temperature. You let the steam, fill the entire inside of the microwave oven, and Bob's your uncle. Your microwave has now been koshered. But again, it has to be clean, and you also cannot put food directly on the glass, rotating tray on the bottom. There has to always be some bit of contact paper or something underneath so that food does not come in direct contact with that. And that's generally how I kosher. That's how I kosher microwave ovens. Now, let's talk about conventional cooktops, electric burners, the grates and the drip pans, the ranges. Let's talk about all of those things. Let's talk about an electric oven or electric stovetop first, because they're the easiest. You have to clean off the top of your oven as best you can. You have to pick up, if it's possible, the top of the stovetop so you can clean underneath. Make sure that there's nothing there as well. Make sure that that's immaculate, that's clean. You don't want any crumbs around. You don't want anything that could potentially be not appropriate for Pesach in any of those locations. You then turn on each of the spiral electric burners until it turns red hot. You let that one burner go for about 5 to 7 minutes. Then you turn it off, and then you move on to the next one. You move on to the next one, and then to the third, the fourth, and sometimes if you have a fifth, you want to do that as well. The area in between cannot be koshered. It's covered. It's a metal that's covered with an enamel. Enamel is not something that can be koshered. So you want to put, for example, maybe a trivet down in the middle of your stovetop, so that if you have a pot and you want to move it off of the burner and you are in the habit of putting it in the middle of the stove, you have a place to put it down so it's not coming in direct contact with the enamel stovetop. The enamel stovetop cannot be koshered. Many people will cover over the area in between the burners with foil. And that is a great idea if that is possible. Sometimes the venting of the oven does not allow for that. And if the venting does not allow for that, you really should put a trivet down in the middle, especially as many people are in the habit of putting things down there. You don't want your Pesach pot to come in contact with the bare enamel. You want that enamel to be covered, and having a trivet there will ensure that doesn't happen if you cannot cover it over with foil. And the same thing is true when it comes to a glass stovetop, which is what I have. Glass stovetops are actually really, really troublesome when it comes to kashering. So my glass stovetop, I turn each burner on until it reaches the highest temperature, let it sit there for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then I turn off, and I do that for all of them. Because you cannot cover over a glass top with foil, because the glass will shatter if you do, I don't recommend it. You should put a bit you should put like a mat. There are special mats that you can buy to cover over the top of a glass top that will conduct the heat in a way that will not cause it to break. That's something advisable. It's something that you can use. But at the very worst, you could put a trivet in the middle again, so that in this case, since you can't cover it with foil, you have a place to move your pot. Now, what do you do if you have a pot that's larger? Excuse me, sorry, I just lost the top of my mic. What happens if you have a pot that's larger than what happens if you have a pot that's larger than the actual burner, right? If you're having a large family gathering, and with an electric stovetop, the pot is held off of the enamel. So if you don't cover it with foil, no harm done. It's not making contact with anything. Well, what do you do with a stovetop if the pot is wider than the actual burner? I recommend special wire gadgets. Would say essentially, I've made them myself, but I recently bought last year. I think I bought them on Amazon. They're little wire doodads that are rings. Mine is actually a little bit nicely shaped. It's a little bit more decorative. And when you put the pot on top of that, on top of the stovetop, and it's very, very thin. It's just enough to hold the pot just off of the surface of the glass. So the area just above the burner is considered kosher for Passover. If the pot isn't wider than that, then you're good to go. If the pot is wider, then those wire things that you put on top of the burner to hold the pot just a touch, just a millimeter or two off the glass, that's something you're going to need to invest in. I've made them myself with wire hangers. That's something that I can do for any of you if any of you are facing this, or you can make them yourself. You just get a bit of a wire hanger. You get like a wire cutting, like a wire cutting wrench, and you want to bend it so that it doesn't scratch the glass. But it's very easy to do, and by having that, it's just raised just a pinch off of the glass, and therefore there's no problem. Now, in an electric glass stovetop, in a range also for that matter, the drip pans should be cleaned as best you can. I do recommend running them through the libun kal, which is the lesser incineration, the highest temperature in the oven for about 45 minutes. Or alternatively, you can buy the foil inserts. I recommend that, but it's not a necessity. Cleaning them out is acceptable. That is just fine. That is okay. You don't have to kosher them, though I do recommend that you do. All right, excuse me. Now a grate for a range. If at all possible, running it through the greater incineration is a good idea. If that's not possible, the lesser incineration is the next best option. But sometimes you'll find that they have rubber feet to ensure they don't scratch the bottom. You can't put it in an oven. You put it into an oven, it's going to ruin your stovetop. So you're going to ruin your gas range. So in that case, you just keep the grate on when you run each burner for about 7 minutes or so at the highest temperature. You just let the grate be present for that as well, and that's enough to kosher it. But if at all possible, you want to be performing some kind of a libun by putting in the oven either for just the highest temperature it can go, or the self-cleaning cycle, if at all possible. But it's not always possible. You have to take a look at your oven and see what the circumstances are there. All right, what's next? Okay, we've talked about the smooth top range already. Okay, splashback and knobs. I do not recommend that you cover over your splashback with foil, because often with the newer ovens, the vent is actually just underneath the splashback. And the splashback, if you have foil on top of it, will start melting because of the exhaust that gets caught in the foil. No matter how good you are with foil, it will happen. It happens. So I do not recommend that you cover your splashback. And it's not necessary in any event. You clean the splashback, you take the knobs off and you clean them as well as you can. You clean underneath them, and then you put them back on and you leave them as they are. Nothing more is necessary. All right. Now, metal utensils, things that are made out of steel, iron, or aluminum, if they're like your cutlery, if these are like your knives, if these things are your if these are the pots that you use for boiling, we've already discussed how you kosher them. If they're stovetop items, then you use boiling water. If they are not stovetop items that go actually into the oven itself, under most cases, those things would require the greater incineration. You cannot rely on the lesser incineration. You cannot rely on libun kal for these items because they come in direct contact with the food. So if they will not survive running through a self-cleaning cycle, then you will put them in your cupboard and lock them up for Pesach and take them out after Pesach. But as far as cutlery goes, you want to put them in one at a time into the boiling water, and then you take them out. And after you perform the hagala, after you perform the boiling water bit, you rinse it off with cold water. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that should be covered as part of that. Let me just see if I can get over here. Okay. All right. Okay, let's talk about glassware and cups. Now, anything that's earthenware, I don't recommend. I mean, you can't kosher them. You put them away for Pesach. Glassware is a little bit more complicated. And in general, most halachic authorities would tell you that glassware cannot be koshered. You cannot kosher it, and you cannot make it kosher for Passover. And that is generally the preferred practice nowadays, because you can go to the dollar shop and buy nice, even glasses. That's great. That's fine. You can definitely do that. You can get very nice plastic ones as well. We use I'm not sure we use these very nice glass looking plastic. I believe my wife gets them from the dollar shop, but we use them year round. They're great. They're fantastic. You can get better ones at Superstore. Glasses are really cheap. Really cheap. If you have glasses, if you have something like glasses that are used that are not used for hot items, like glasses for drinking cold things, those glasses can be put into the tub, and we can have that process that we mentioned earlier. You fill up the tub with water, you let it sit there for 24 hours, then you drain it after 24 hours, you fill it up again, let it sit for 24 hours, and you repeat a third time. That's what you do for items that have never come in contact with hot items, glasses that have been used primarily for drinking juice, drinking milk, drinking water. A glass mug cannot be kosher this way because it acquires its chametz quality from the introduction of heat, and therefore this practice will not work. If you want to keep your Kiddush cup, for example, from the week for Passover, for the rest of the year that you use, and you want to keep it for Pesach, that's perfectly acceptable. That's perfectly fine. You would kosher it much as you like all these other things. But again, you have to make sure that you are able to clean every little nook and cranny. There are certain things that you just can't clean. You can't get inside, like, for example, like a colander. How are you going to clean a colander? You're going to get inside every single one of those holes to make sure that there's nothing there. Very often there's a little bit of food that gets stuck on the inside. You can never be certain. You can never be sure. So for things, and we'll talk about some specific cases later on, but things that cannot be cleaned, you really can't be kosher, and as such, they should be put away for Pesach. Cupboards and drawers. Cupboards and drawers do not need to be koshered. All you need to do is wipe them down. Some people have the practice of putting contact paper down, but all you need to do is just sort of wipe them off, make sure there are no crumbs, make sure that there's no dirt, there's no schmutz, there's no food residue. You just wipe them down, and that is fine. And the same thing is true with drawers. All you need to do is just sort of wipe them off. And some people have the practice of putting contact paper down. Now, I skipped over sinks and counters. Let's talk about that. Just excuse me a second. I'm going to close the door. Okay, got it. Thank you. Is this the NCSY program is being dismissed, and noisy teenagers are running through the building. All right, so let's talk about sinks. All right, so metal sinks can be kosher, and we'll talk about how you kosher them. But sinks that are made with that have enamel, sinks that are made of china, sinks that are made of the artificial stone products, they generally cannot be koshered. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So how do you kosher a sink? Well, remember how we said the way something it acquires its non-kosher quality or its chametz quality, that's how you expunge it, that's how you kosher it, that's how you make it kosher for Passover. Sinks are much the same. A sink is never put on this top of the stove, right? The sink is never on the stove top. It's never put into an oven. How does it acquire its non-kosher quality? How does it acquire its chametz quality? Well, because you take chametz stick hot water, like you boil your pasta and you drain the water out onto the sink. That's how the sink becomes chametz sticks. So you kosher it much the same way. You fill it up. You have to pour hot water onto the entire surface of the sink. Now, I heard this bit of advice. I've actually carried out. I've only recently bought the item in question, and that is a metal watering can. A metal watering can that you buy from Home Depot, that you buy from Lowe's, that you buy from Rona. You want to make sure that the top, the spout doesn't have any cover on it at all. You have to remove the cover. But if you put that on a stovetop and you have boiling hot water, you have a very easy mechanism to pour a whole lot of hot water in a way that keeps your hand very far away from the hot water, and you can pour that over the entire. You have a lot of control. You can get the entire surface of the sink, and you have to make sure that you pour it directly over every part of the sink. You can't just pour it on one part and let the water run down. You have to actually have direct water from the pot that was on the stovetop. Or if you're using a kettle, that also works. An electric kettle is also fine. You just have to hold down the button to make sure that that you reach a roaring boil, and you can pour that over the entire surface of the sink. And the same thing can be done for most countertops. I am of the opinion that you can kosher Formica. I'm of the opinion that you can kosher artificial granite. I am of the opinion that you can kosher most of these man-made items. The only thing you cannot kosher is porcelain. Most of enamel also I wouldn't recommend that you kosher, but for the artificial stone top, whether it's granite, whether it's marble, whether it's quartz, all those things can be koshered through this method also of pouring hot water over the top in much the same way. Excuse me. Now, this is my opinion. This was the practice that we've had here in Calgary for a long, long time. I know that when I used to give this class when Rabbi Miller was the rabbi, when I was the assistant rabbi way back in 2009, I said much the same. I know these were Rabbi Miller's halachic opinions, and they're definitely halachically valid. Do not be surprised when you encounter individuals and institutions that say countertops cannot be koshered. And as such, many people cover over their countertops with contact paper, with foil, or some kind of wood or plastic. They cover over the countertops because many people are of the opinion that all these artificial items, anything other than metal cannot be koshered. Metal, according to everyone, can be koshered. But again, all of these items need to be left for 24 hours before you pour the hot water on them. The same thing is true with the faucet. You have to pour hot water over the faucet and the tap. You get the pot of boiling water and you put it underneath the faucet to clean out the bottom end of the faucet, the part where that sticks down, that has the water coming out, if that's possible. Not every kitchen setup allows for that, but that's definitely what you should do. If you do not have that kind of a setup, give me a call. But that's generally what you do. You get a pot of water to the top, you let it boil, and then you basically raise it so that the faucet, the down part of the faucet, actually is immersed in hot water. Filters, if at all possible, should be taken out and cleaned. They do not necessarily have to be kosher. All right. Tabletops. Tabletops are usually wood. In order to make a kosher for Pesach, you'd have to sand it down. And because most people do not want to sand down their tabletops, get a plastic tablecloth and cover it up. Make sure that the tablecloth is always there for the entirety of Pesach, and you put either your dairy or your meat tablecloth on top of that plastic one to ensure that there are two layers present to there'll always be two layers present so that nothing seeps through to the table itself and then gets back into your food. But so anyways, tablecloths. Plastic is fantastic. The thicker plastic would be better. The thicker it is, the better it is. That's what you do for your tabletops. But you should definitely clean your tables. If you have leaves, get in between those leaves and clean them all out. Make sure that there are no crumbs around. In general, you want to remove all crumbs before Pesach begins. High chairs. High chairs just have to be clean. Generally speaking, you do not give babies food that will burn them. And so therefore, the only high chair just has to be cleaned. The tray of the high chair has to be cleaned. That's about it. Some people have the practice of putting down some kind of contact paper, but if you have a 3-year-old like I do, who's very particular about his tray, he will not tolerate anything and he'll try to peel it off. He'll try to take it off. Just make sure that it's cleaned well. I wouldn't stress making sure that it's covered up. Tablecloths, you toss them into the washing machine and they are kosher for Pesach. Use soap and Bob's your uncle, it is usable. That's true for cloth tablecloths. Vinyl tablecloths either should be disposed of or put to the side, and special Pesach ones should be brought out. All right, can openers. I mentioned can openers before. Can openers are like any other item that you cannot get into all the nooks and crannies, and as such, can openers should not be clean. You can't cash a can opener for Pesach. You can usually buy a cheap one at the dollar shop for just a couple bucks. Do so there. Buy a new one. And put your regular vachadik, your regular weekday, and your regular non-Pesach can opener in your drawer to be put away for Pesach. Coffee makers are a little bit more complicated, but generally speaking, a coffee maker that has only been used for the making of unflavored coffee is generally okay. I would definitely recommend cleaning it out. But that said, the carafe, if it's glass, should be replaced and get a new one for Pesach. They're usually easy enough to order. You can buy knockoffs that are made for your unit. They're easy, they're cheap. The carafe, because they tend to be washed with other items, either in the sink or in the dishwasher. The carafe should be put away for Pesach. If you have a metal one, it is possible to kosher it, but I've only seen metal ones sporadically. The carafe should be replaced for Pesach. When it comes to something like a Keurig, if the Keurig has only been used for unflavored coffee, it's fine. Just wash it off, and you're good to go. Water coolers. Nothing is ever hot there. Make sure that it's very clean, because sometimes you have dirty hands when you turn on the faucet. So the faucet should be cleaned off. The tap, the actual the handle should be cleaned off. Don't use if it offers hot water. Don't use the hot water part of it on Pesach. I don't recommend it. Because that would have to be koshered. For example, if you put oatmeal, like instant oatmeal, underneath and you turn the spigot on, there's a possibility that there was some interconnected, a moment of connection between the oatmeal and the spigot, and as such, I wouldn't recommend that you use the hot tap or the hot spigot on a water cooler. Just but the water one, the cool one is fine. Now, food processors and blenders. The blades and the receptacles should be new for Pesach. There is a possibility in some cases that they can be koshered, but it's generally easier just to get a cheap food processor or a cheap blender and keep that, or get special Pesach blades and things of that sort. The receptacle, the parts that actually come in contact with the food, if you get additional ones of those, that should be fine. The base unit can remain the same, but it should be cleaned. Many people would tell you not to keep it on for Pesach, and yeah, that's definitely a legitimate point of view. But if you have a fancy schmancy food processor and you want to keep it for Pesach, there are ways to kosher it. Give me a call and we'll figure it out. But if you're using just a regular run of the mill, even just a KitchenAid one, pick up less than $200, just get a cheap one, or get replacement parts that the receptacle that holds the food and Pesach blades. All right. Now, the following items cannot be koshered. Toaster ovens cannot be koshered. Dishwashers cannot be koshered. Water urns, some people will use them for Pesach. I don't think that is advisable. I know that there have been cases, people have discussed with me circumstances that do not require koshering. I believe the Kashinskis have one that they spoke to me about last year or the year before. I think they spoke to me about a hot water urn and the way that they use it, and it was fine. So they don't all have to be put away. They don't all have to, you don't have to get a Pesach one necessarily. If you have any questions, give me a call and we can talk about how you're using your hot water urn, and perhaps it may not require, you may be able just to use your regular one on Pesach. Blechs cannot be koshered. Get a new one for Pesach. There are a whole bunch of other discussions that we could have. For example, candlesticks. If a person has metal candlesticks, do you have to kosher your candlesticks? No, you do not have to kosher your candlesticks. They do have to be cleaned. And then on Pesach, when you clean them, if you're going to clean them, don't clean them, clean them in the washroom sink. Don't clean them where you have access to your food, where hot water could potentially come in contact with them, and you can get some kind of cross-contamination from a previous cleaning. So as such, candlesticks and the tray, those things should be you can use them on Pesach, but they should be put to the side and used on Pesach. And when you wash them, don't wash them in the kitchen sink. Just trying to see if there's anything else. Colanders and graters, we discussed a little bit. You can't get it those places where you cannot get into the little nitty gritty corners. Those things you cannot kosher, because there's always a concern about some food, a particle of food being left behind. Will still remain on Pesach, rendering things not kosher for Passover. Dentures, biplates, and braces, should be cleaned. That's about it. Not much more that you can do. You don't have to kosher your dentures. Ice cream scoopers require hagala. Ice cream trays should be put to the side. Put to the side. You shouldn't use them on Pesach. You should have special Pesach ones. But if you do not have Pesach ones and you're quite certain about how clean they are, then you can use your regular non-Pesach ice trays to make ice. Refrigerators and freezers, you should wipe them out. You should, very often little bits of food get caught. It's a good opportunity to like unscrew some of the parts that, cover over where food and blueberries and things in your freezer could find themselves, which often happens to us. You should clean those things out as best you can. Some people have a practice of putting contact paper down. It's not a necessity. In the refrigerator, it's not a necessity, absolutely. And definitely not the freezer. But some people do have such a practice. And as such, those things, you just have to wipe them out as best you can and clean out, make sure there's no residual food that is left. Like napkin rings, for example, that should be kosher. You should put that into boiling water, or at least pour boiling water on top of it. And I think I've covered everything I want. Oh, washing cups. You should not be using the same washing cups on Pesach that you use during the rest of the year. Same thing is true with water pitchers, pitchers for juice. Those things should be put away with your chametz dishes. And I think that is it. I'm now open to any questions, comments, or rebuttals. And I'm also always available by phone. You know how to reach me. I'm pretty accessible. You can write me an email. But with that, I'm going to stop the sharing and open up the floor for anyone to ask any questions.
I had an idea, Rabbi, about my fridge. I thought to myself, why don't I take the shelves out and pop them in the dishwasher?
Oh, we do
I
that.
thought, nah, you had better ask the rabbi before I do that for Passover.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. We do that. We actually take it out and we just sort of let it soak in the bathtub and scrub it off there. But yeah, you can put it.
That's what I used to do. But I thought, you know what? Not all of them will fit in the dishwasher, but for the ones that will fit in the dishwasher, I said, I bet it can get in those, cracks where the plastic and the glass join better than soaking in the tub. And you're saying that would be fine?
Yeah, if you can fit them in, that'd be great.
Yeah, some will, not all. Okay.
Well, take a look. See how well it actually cleans them. I mean, tell me, report back to me, please, and tell me how well a job is. Like maybe we'll incorporate that into the next class.
Okay, thank you.
It'll be Amy's method. I'll add it to my notes. You'll live on forever. Anybody else? All right. Then. Okay.
Actually,
Jennifer, just wait a second, please.
Sure.
A nice tablecloth on top of the dining table, but on top it has a glass like an IKEA table. Can you kosher the glass and leave the beautiful tablecloth underneath?
So the glass can't be koshered. I would recommend in that case that, if you bought it from IKEA is really good about replacement parts. You call up IKEA, they will send you often for free a replacement glass top if that's what you're using. Or alternatively, you can get just like, like a clear vinyl tablecloth that you can put on top of the glass. That's another one. Okay, Jennifer, floor is yours.
Yes, I had a question. You were talking about the oven that has a fan in it. We have one of those ovens, which is the special aqua lift, special coating, can't use the caustic. But I never ever considered the fan before. So what should we do with that one?
Can you see the fan from the oven? Can you see?
Yes. Yeah. From the inside, yes.
Yeah. So take a good look at it. If there's no food residue, I think you'll be fine.
Okay.
If there's some, like there's specks of like, something that's spattered in there, then we'll have to reconvene. But take a look first. If it doesn't look like it has bits of food on it, then you just run it through not the self-cleaning. You run it through the highest temperature for about 40 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
And you're okay in that case.
Okay, I'll take a look. Thanks.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to end the class. And if there are any outstanding questions, you know how to reach me. And thank you all for coming to the class tonight.